And we're live. Welcome back, everybody, to the PEO Speedwagon Podcast. As always, with myself, Rick Johnson, and Ryan Shapiro, president at PEOG, and here with our first in-person guest, Bill Allen from Paychex. Bill, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, bud. This is awesome.
That's cool. This is great. We made it.
Yeah, thanks for stepping into the studio here, and excited to talk a little PEO.
Yeah, just a few connection flights and plane delays later.
That's all right. We made it. We made it.
That's right.
Yeah, nothing too bad. Well, as you guys know, and folks listening out there, this is a podcast mostly to help me kind of learn about the industry, as well as dive into folks' backgrounds and really just get a grip on things going on, trends in the industry, and speak with different leaders about how they develop folks in the space. And so, Bill, I'd love if you could dive a little bit into your background in the PEO space and kind of how you got started.
Yeah, so I started back in 2000 at Paychex. I only lasted a short time, unsuccessful period of time, I might add, in the payroll industry. And I found my way down in Cincinnati, Ohio, to get involved in the ASO business. So I did that for a while. And back then, Paychex admittedly was very small from a PEO perspective. We had purchased a PEO years before. But we were predominantly in Texas and Florida. And but the guys that were doing that down there, we would always bump into them at sales conferences. And I always used to joke they would walk around our sales conferences with like gold crowns and scepters. I don't know what those guys do, but I want to do that. So eventually met some guys and they asked me to move down to Florida. So my family and I moved down in 2005. I sold for about 4 years. And then there was an opening to move into leadership, which interestingly, I didn't think I ever wanted to do. But for reasons we can get into, I decided to take the leap into leadership and did that for about 8 years at a district level, covering most of the state of Florida, at one point Louisiana. And then when we purchased Oasis in the latter part of 2018, I was asked to step into a sales director role.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that ever since.
Yeah, great. So in your current position, right, it's the National PEO Director of Partnership Development. So maybe tell me a little bit about what your current role is compared to roles you've had in the past.
That's a lot of names.
It's a lot of names. Yeah. I chose it myself, so it would be hard for people to you did. Yeah, it's really interesting. Again, I'm very transparent about what Paychex has done well in the past and what we've sort of had to move towards. And I think this is sort of indicative of the industry as a whole. The manner by which we approached partnerships traditionally in our industry is very different than the way we approach it today. And I don't know that our company was as prepared as we wanted to be to make that pivot, which is to sort of be more strategic in our partnerships as opposed to just the spreadsheeting environment that tended to exist in our industry.
Yeah.
And so we started talking, a year and a half ago about adding this role. At the time, there was no national director of strategic partnerships. I was responsible for a portion of the country, predominantly leading sales leaders and individual producers. And when we started talking about it, and I had some conversations with partners that we had, it sounded like this was something that was really necessary to have someone who would lead it nationally to be out, really, frankly, doing something that I'm not always comfortable with, which is listening more than I talk. But I went out and started having conversations and realized at that time, along with some of our other senior leaders, that this was a necessary role. And I took it over October 1st. And frankly, I've been a road warrior since then. I've been traveling around the country, having really, really great conversations with folks, telling us where they think the industry is going, where we may have done well in the past, where we could improve. And I've learned, frankly, more about the industry in the last 5 months than I probably did in the previous 5 years, because I was talking to people from that come from a different perspective.
Yeah, I find that it's like inside the PEO world, I experienced this in disparity. Like you're operating in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
Like you're all drinking the same Kool-Aid. Yeah. You all like the same wheelhouse services. You can't understand why anybody else would not buy your particular brand of PEO versus like you're flabbergasted to a degree.
Yeah.
So I imagine that like you get to talk with people and hear these different perspectives, and then, it's such a growing need too for what you do, because the PEO broker space is growing super fast.
Yeah.
And then really kind of post, I'd be curious what you think about this, but like post ACA, that wall started to come down between brokers and PEOs because of all the implications and community ratings. And like now it's kind of like, okay, at least here initially in this 2 to 50 space, maybe we've got something we can talk about.
Yep.
And so,
well, I think there was a natural sort of antagonistic partnership.
Yeah.
The reluctance that existed between the broker community, both on the property and casualty side and the health side, for those reasons, But I also think it's important to note that there really wasn't much of a national legislative recognition of what PEOs were pre-ACA, right? That really changed in ACA because it was the first time anybody was commenting about PEOs,
Right.
because they needed to have that, our industry, included in the conversations around how ACA was going to be applied to small companies. And for that reason, we started to get much more of a national understanding of what it was. We had a congressional understanding of what it was, and that allowed us to start having conversations that frankly had more legitimacy than perhaps some thought they would have had.
Yeah, and for Tracy in Wisconsin, it was the ACA is the Affordable Care Act, and ASO was affiliated service organization. So we when Bill and I had dinner, we found out we had our John C. Riley and Will Ferrell, our best friend, went over the fact we're both fans of Smartless.
Yeah,
and so huge fan. So we kind of bored to death Stacy for a minute talking about it, but no, I mean, it is that was huge. That, and then followed by the SBEA and the further application of like the PEO and its legitimizing. I mean, has just been enormous. And people start talking about it. Like people they'd stop saying PEO is witchcraft or this potentially bad 3-letter word, and now start working with people.
And I think in fairness too, if you look at the history of PEO going back 30 years, as is the case with any industry, there were some bad performers. There were some companies that didn't always represent themselves in a way that had longevity in those partnerships. It was more of a, let me get you through the door. And so there was some burned bridges that existed with the industry. But again, because of that national conversation being sort of precluded by changes in legislation, there were folks that were willing to have a conversation that weren't willing to have it previously.
Yeah. And I think, we talked about that, and you were very transparent about it, and you even kind of touched on it here. Like, there was a minute where it was kind of unclear as to like where Paychex sat in the PEO conversation.
Yeah.
And we experienced that even just in the St. Louis market when I was just exclusively in St. Louis before I went to other parts of the country with Insperity, which was like, is Paychex really in this? And then I think I carried that bias into when we started our own business doing this. And then I had connected with people in your department who started reaching out, and we started having dialogues. And through our process and investigation of what Paychex had done and like really where we had seen investment in the conversations you and I have, it helped us see like, PEO, like Paychex and PEO are now synonymous.
Yeah.
And last year we put several hundred employees with you guys, which is, we wouldn't do if we didn't see.
First, let me say I'm super grateful for that.
Yeah.
But I think, again, part of being a really, really large company, and the one that's been around for 55 years is you mentioned it earlier, you tend to be caught in your own vacuum of what you think you're supposed to be doing. And I think we started to evolve that. Our new CEO is someone who's very pro PEO.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that we aren't still interested in every aspect of what we do. Part of what we think our value proposition be everything to everyone at various stages of, a professional life cycle. But I think the biggest move that we made, which coincides with the question you asked about reaching out to strategic partners, is that much of what we had done previously was upgrading current clients. That was where we focused most of our attention. And so there wasn't necessarily a necessity of us going out and reaching out to partners that might bring us new companies that might need our help. And so because we didn't approach it that way, we tended not to imagine that our value proposition had to be anything other than to a current client, right? Which made us really relearn the extent to which technology conversations were important at the beginning. They weren't on our technology anymore.
Right.
And so it's been a learning curve for us. And I openly admit that despite our history, it's been a learning curve. I think what we benefit from, though, is frankly, the economy of scale and the national presence that we have to enable us to hear the stories of a company in California at the same time as we hear a story of a company in New York, which can be profoundly different.
Yeah. You mentioned, learning in the industry. And so I do want to ask as well, like, for someone with over 20 years of PEO experience, what's been your learning journey coming from someone who is learning the industry themselves? Kind of where did you start? What were the most impactful things along the way to help you learn PEO and get really good at it? And anything you want to look back on, I guess, highlight in your career that really boosted you forward?
Yeah, I would say internally for me, it was, again, something I wasn't necessarily comfortable with when I started as a leader, which was asking more questions.
Yeah.
And I think understanding the why of why companies make a decision to come to us. I think in a sales mentality, which the three of us have, we have a tendency to sort of be excited when a new company chooses us, and as well we should. But we don't dig deeper into exactly why they chose us. We just simply accept that answer. So early in my leadership career, I would spend an awful lot of time talking to companies after they had decided to come to us, and then throughout their journey with us. And, I often say we're in the perfection business. And so we're going to make mistakes. And often where you are defined is the extent to which you can fix those mistakes, understand from them, and learn from them. But my own personal journey about learning PEO was really when things didn't go particularly well, when a client didn't choose us. I would spend a lot of time, not only hopefully in discussion with, I say client, with the prospective partner of ours that chose not to work with us. I would spend time talking to them, and I would ask them, to the extent that they were comfortable, why did you not choose us? And then I would sort of go back and speak with the various aspects of the business, right, within the workers' compensation underwriting team, the health insurance underwriting team, how we were approaching, challenges with state unemployment insurance, what our HR value proposition was. And I would sort of go backwards into that and say, well, if we didn't present it the right way, or we didn't come across to the prospective client the right way, that's on us. And the only way you can do that is to be a student of it. And I say this to anyone who works in the PEO industry. If you're not a student, it's not brain surgery, but if you're not a student of this industry and of what it provides, you don't know where to pivot in conversations with 50-person companies.
Right.
Because, the largest portion of American businesses are small businesses. Right. Every single one of them has a different need. Every single one of them has a different strategic plan, a different vision. And so really spending a lot of time understanding where we could have done better in presenting our value proposition was a big part of that. Yeah. From the perspective of where I had the biggest moment, it was with a group that we lost in the sales process. We had worked with them. There was a number of other PEOs involved. And I got invited to go to speak at a gathering of a bunch of HR professionals. And this person, the CEO, happened to show up at this meeting. And again, it was kind of arrogance on my part that I thought I knew exactly why they hadn't decided. And ironically, I thought it was because of the health insurance cost. I thought that was purely the reason why it was. And when I sat down with this guy, I ended up having dinner with him that night, and he was explaining to me all the reasons, all the things we missed. And the craziest part about it was, in that particular case, the things that we missed weren't things we didn't do. It was things we didn't uncover because we hadn't taken the time to really step back, listen a lot, and take the necessary pathways to find out what they needed. And eventually that group became a client a year later. So,
well, it's interesting. I had a conversation with one of our representatives at a different PEO, just kind of about something just like that, right? There is this assumption the medical matters. It absolutely does. It's all the things people say, second largest cost and fastest growing cost and everything else. And that's all true. But there's times, and we all see this, that the PEO underwriting strategy doesn't always produce the best pricing. Like, I think it's important for non-PEO people to know that, because when you apply economy of scale, 750,000 lives, 350,000, even 20,000, like, you expect something very different. And the PEO is trying to manage their risk as much as they are anything else.
Sure.
But when the medical doesn't work, I was talking to this person about how, like, that is a unfair failure of the model. That it cracks open the question. Well, if you can't create the economy of scale when you've got 20,000 and I have 20, like, what else doesn't work? And that's why you have to develop the value proposition so effectively. Like, you can't just count on medical.
Correct.
Because if it's only medical and the opportunity erodes, like, that thought process comes in and be like, well, this particular PEO can't really do what they say because the first thing that really mattered to me didn't work, and you haven't developed anything else. And so it's like, how do you think about that? For like a new rep, I'm going to ask a question like, medical is this big shiny object. The customers care about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's an integral part of the analysis. However, it's not the only thing. So, like, how do you spin those two plates? How do you think?
I love that question, because we talk about this all the time. The irony is when we teach ourselves to have really good strategic conversations with business owners, that conversation can often fall into for simplicity's sake, 4 buckets, right? We talk about HR, we talk about safety and loss control, we talk about benefits, we talk about technology.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do our jobs at the beginning, and when I say our jobs, this isn't necessarily just the pursuit of a sale. This is the opportunity to have a conversation with someone to find out if our paths could come together and we could be mutually beneficial to each other. We do all this work up front, and then we ask the question about medical. And then the process simply becomes about medical because, frankly, it's the most laborious process of getting a quote on a PEO is to get that medical insurance. We ask for a lot of information. So as that becomes more and more a part of the conversation, it then just becomes about what is the health insurance going to cost. So what we try to talk about for PEO sales folks across all companies, not just at Paychex, a great lesson is you really have to stay focused on the needs that you uncovered in the very first conversation that you have. And you have to continue to remind the company that you're speaking with about the value that's to be brought by a partnership with your organization as you go through the medical. And frankly, it's simple, but you've got to not start off by saying the value proposition of a PEO is save you money on medical insurance. Because there are, and again, this is not limited to Paychex. This is true of so many great companies in our industry. You know, the idea is cost containment. I mean, we tend to overvalue the idea, you know, that you're completely protected if you're in a PEO. That is simply not true.
Right.
But if the cost containment allows the economy of scale to give you more cost predictability year over year, such that if you have something, we refer to it often as a non-recurring medical event, right? That would typically really harm you in the open market. The PEO can be a little better at sustaining a predictable price year over year. But you have to start off by talking about that. The second thing is, and again, true of many PEOs, we talk about holistic health now, as opposed to health insurance, right? And this is where you asked the question before, Rick, about, you know, how do you learn it? How do you dig into it? I spend a lot of my time trying to understand the value of what a health advocacy program means, right? It's an accompaniment to a health insurance program such that if you have a challenge with your health insurance, where do you go? You go to the carrier. You can often get lost a little bit in there. A health advocacy program can be something that really helps you navigate the complexities of medical insurance. You talk about employee assistance programs dealing with mental health, as opposed to just dealing with physical health. You talk about the understanding of what an FSA or an HSA or an HRA can actually do for you from a tax perspective. And so I think understanding at the beginning that you're entering into that type of a world can be really beneficial for understanding the value proposition, the differentiation, if you will, between simply being on a health plan by itself and being one through PEO.
Which is kind of also the challenge too. Then you are kind of getting into medical.
Yep.
Somehow you have to bifurcate those two conversations. Like there's medical price and then there's medical value. And like the value is in cost containment. The value is in the network, the way they're managed across national plans, all the other things. But then also like here are these other services that you as a 20-person company don't have access to.
Yep.
Or you're going to pay a pretty healthy bill to get it into your environment. And you're probably not going to do that if you're just worried about medical price anyway, because like you're not really aligned there. So I think it is. It's a tricky dance for new reps. It's a tricky one for tenured reps too, because there is that very easy draw, like to just go, well, we're going to save you 20% on medical or 11% or whatever it is, and like try to have that carry the day.
Well, I mean, you probably see this. You probably both see this. You know, the extent to which there's limitations on open market policies. Again, not to take anything away from the value proposition there, but typically because of the potential of adverse selection, the risk associated with having varying cost structures with different plans. You know, a lot of times in an open market, you're going to have a platinum plan and a platinum minus plan, right? And who chooses those plans is most often the owner, right? And their health needs are profoundly different than the health needs of some 25-year-old single male, or potentially a single mother, or there's a lot of difference. So I think again, that value proposition there is not to say plan to plan, I'm going to save you money. It's to say I may come up with a strategy for you that's going to show you that people are going to be able to choose that platform which best suits their health needs at that time. That strategy might well result in cost savings. It might, because ultimately you could have someone who's currently on a HSA or a high deductible health plan, for example, and they're not really using it, right? But then I can find them a higher deductible copay plan, which ends up being less in many cases. So, but that's where it goes back to, Rick, what you're asking, which is how do you know all of that? how do you get to that? And it is a very, very difficult thing to teach.
Yeah.
And the health insurance industry's gotten more complex, not less.
Yeah, you really got to think on your feet, which makes me think of your other background. You managed a jazz club in Chicago for a while, right? That's with thinking on your feet.
Look at that segue. Yeah, that's a great segue.
Great segue.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
He's not the best PEO podcast host in the business, which there's only like 2 others. So for nothing.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's interesting. So it bears mentioning that getting into the jazz club business was following a failed professional hockey career, which never happened. I think I've spent most of my youth thinking I was going to be a professional hockey player. I did not realize they play ice hockey in Sweden and Norway. Yeah. But I had worked in restaurants pretty much from the time I was 14 years old. And so Chicago, got out of college. I started running a jazz club. And you and I talked about this before about how, how did that prepare you potentially for being a leader in an industry that's seemingly unrelated? And I do like telling this story because for people that aspire to be leaders, this is like the most critical moment in my life. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was the most critical moment in my leadership development. Here I was 25 years old, very fortunate to be in this position. It was a pretty high-end jazz club in Chicago. Can I plug it? Can I say it?
Yeah, of course.
It was called Pops for Champagne. It was a great champagne bar and jazz club. Extraordinary. Tom and Lynn Verhey were the owners, incredible people, gave me such an opportunity. But when I look back at who was working there at the time, we had 2 bartenders that were Vietnam veterans. We had a lot of people that had not been in the country for very long, and had made their way to Chicago to try and find money, in many cases to send back home to their families. It was in the 1990s, which was during the beginning of the HIV epidemic. And so there were a lot of young men working there who were dealing with a lot more than I could ever possibly imagine. And there were folks escaping gangs in the south side of Chicago. And so I found myself in this environment where for the first time, I was like, all of my experiences are irrelevant here. And it's played such a huge role because, and I hate to quote, to use Simon Sinek because it's an overused cliche, but understanding people's why about what they're doing. If you can kind of get to the root of that, salespeople will immediately become more passionate if you understand kind of why they're there and what they're trying to get to, as opposed to just sort of ascribing something that you think should be important to them, like going on a trip every year or whatever else. But the experience with those folks and hearing those stories, it was incredible. Now, I should mention that the reason I left the jazz club business was because I met my wife. She was not as excited about me working until 3 a.m. in the morning as I was. And so I went and did the only other thing I thought I would know how to do, which was sell. And that was because my dad had been a salesman for most of his life.
Any connection to Paychex then at the time, or how did you end up?
It was the only company that would hire me, Rick.
There you go.
Yeah. I swear it was like during the dot-com boom in Chicago, you could fall off the street and get a sales job unless you were me. But Paychex, my first territory was, I lived in Chicago. My first territory was selling payroll in Northern Illinois and Southern Wisconsin. And it was crazy. My office was an hour and a half reverse commute, but they gave me an opportunity and taught me an awful lot in the early stages. So I'm pretty grateful for that. I don't think I would have thought back then I would be 25 years later and I'd still be at the same company, but it was cool to have been a part of that. And it's a very different company than it is now.
No, that's amazing.
Imagine that. I mean, as you talk to people, and we talked about this, like the access you have with Paychex at large for somebody who was slinging payroll 25 years ago to where you are now is something people can really aspire to be, right? Yeah. Not only in the graciousness and the way you talk about it and the passion that's very evident, but it's just also like, that is a tough role. I mean, you don't think you are going to make it potentially, just like a lot of people do in their, first sales jobs, but then looking at that and going like, okay, how do I emulate that? And best way to do it is, outside of listening to this podcast, is let's just talk to you. So,
well, look, again, I don't want to overstate it, but brand new sales jobs are some of the hardest jobs ever. I mean, back in my day, it was, they'd hand you a set of steak knives and tell you to go knock on doors.
Sure.
But I do think the perseverance that's required through those early stages in your sales career, whether you're starting in PEO or whatever you might be doing, really requires great leadership.
Yeah.
And I think I was very fortunate to have some pretty stellar leaders early on that gave me an opportunity to listen to me a little bit more, hear my frustrations, but then actually generate pathways by which I could exceed expectations in those areas where maybe I already had some natural skill sets, while I developed those areas where I had virtually no natural skill sets. And the irony of that is 25 years later, I'm still pursuing things about which I have no natural skill sets, but just being kind of taught at that stage of my career that it's not just about, keep getting up every day, keep doing it. I got to help you find a pathway to find some joy in what you're doing.
Yeah. Do you feel like the leadership that you were given when you were up and coming in your career informed how you lead now? Or do you feel like you maybe learned what to do and what not to do along the way?
You've read my autobiography.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, there's a lot more what not to do, if I'm being candid.
Yeah.
I remember a particular story. I won't go too far into it, but there was a leader that I had that had a rule that you don't take PTO if you're not at your number. And it was the manner by which that was delivered to me at a time when my life was, I don't want to say fragile because I don't want to overstate it, but my kids at the time were 4 and 2. My wife and I had just moved to Florida. Her family was in Ohio. I promised her we were going to go back for Thanksgiving every year to spend with her huge family. And in that particular year, 3 days before I was supposed to leave, I was informed that I couldn't take PTO. And I just remember how crushing that was.
Yeah.
And again, companies can have their policies. I'm not begrudging any of them. But you can really break someone's spirit when they might not be in the best place already.
Sure.
And I think for me, the learning I took from that was you have to make decisions for yourself about being the same kind of leader in good times as you are in difficult times. And that's the hardest thing about leadership is, are you the same coach when you're losing as you are when you're winning?
Yeah.
And, I've seen it with my kids in their various sports endeavors, it's a really hard thing to do, but if you can be that consistent person, and everyone fails at it, myself included, but if you can demonstrate some level of consistency with that, you can really get buy-in from people to believe that they can be successful even when they're not feeling as though they are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people in those times, they just want to feel supported. Whatever that takes on, can move people, through those hard times. It's like, the way out is through it, by Robert Frost. And, it's like, and sometimes you can't do it on your own. And so a great leader can help you get out of that situation.
Well, and that's the most rewarding part of leadership too, is if you can help someone navigate those, those dark woods, as it were. You do find that those are the things you remember. When you're going through difficult times as a leader, you tend to remember those moments when somebody kind of, again, it's self-serving to a certain extent, but when someone knocks on your door and says, hey, I just want to tell you, I want to tell you why I feel like I've had this great success, and at least in a small part, it's due to you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Man, I'm sitting here with, both of you have over 20.
Do you think you're ever going to do that, Rick? Do you think you're ever going to come into my say hi? It's not in the cards.
You're still waiting for that.
It's just like,
I can leave you two alone.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of experience in this room, between you guys. So maybe that's also part of the fast track for learning is obviously tuning into this podcast. But from my perspective, I mean, being able to sit here with both of you guys and hear what leadership is in the space, and having it spoken about so honestly and clearly, being able to reflect on the leadership that you've experienced through your career leading up to it now, and knowing that it pairs with how Ryan, I think, views it as well from conversations we've had, and now I'm framing my own and starting to understand what leadership in this space looks like. It really does feel like I'm on this fast track to learning it, as well as with the perspective of, being a PEO consultant, PEO broker in the space. You get to see how so many PEOs operate and approach not only leadership of their teams as we understand team dynamics, but also how they interact with clients and, when they do win them and when they don't necessarily get them and how they react. And so, I think it's so fascinating to see from my perspective as a newbie to the space, and just have this eagle's eye view of the whole industry. And so one question I want to ask for you as well is what are some trends that you might see in the industry that have kind of been a pattern that's been building over the 20 plus years you've been in the space?
Yeah, well, I'm simplifying a little when I say this, but I feel that when I started in the industry, the extent to which a business owner would convey to you that they cared about their employees was way less prevalent than it is now. Now, that may be a consequence of having to pretend that I care, or maybe a consequence of actually caring. But in either case, I would say, half of the companies that we talk to, probably 3/4 of the companies we talk to, genuinely have an interest in an empathetic approach to their employees. And that's inclusive of what type of benefits they want to put in front of them. But I hear more about development. Like, how do we help our employees develop? And, you're talking about this. How do we help you develop to become a next great leader in the PEO space? And that really is about, it's not just experiential. Like, at some point, somebody has to sit you down and say, these are the things we got to develop. These are the things there's great minds that have come before the two of us, right? That have demonstrated great ways to teach.
Absolutely.
And I think that is such a critical element. But those business owners, and I really feel like this is going to continue, they're faced with both that goal, which is to find the best employees they possibly can, but perhaps more importantly, to keep them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Look, when I was growing up, my dad would be like, find a job and die there. Like, I hate to say it, but that was how it was.
Yeah.
The new generation of employees they have a expectation that you're going to continue to earn their employment, right? They know they have to earn their employment, but as an owner, as an operator of a business, you have to continue to earn them. And I think that ties into everything that the PEO does, right? I mentioned before about from an HR perspective. We used to think of HR as exclusively compliance based.
Yeah.
Right? Just protect the company from getting sued. Well, now it's so much more than that. It is so much more about performance management. It's so much more about, how do I properly onboard an employee in the first 90 days? That's, to me, the most important period of employment you ever have. You can get it really right or you can get it really wrong. Well, the one thing they don't have is time. So as they imagine HR in a new way, that's part of it. It is compliance because, of course, now, probably tenfold more companies have employees in multi-state environments than they used to as well. So there's still that compliance aspect. But I do think a lot of it has to do with, how am I going to build a great company, fully recognizing that my most important asset is my employees?
Yeah, it's very well said. It is interesting. We have an opportunity through the work that our team does at our organization to talk to a lot of people. Yeah. And I remember the time when I was a rep, you had a goal of 10, 12 meetings a month. And if you sat with all 10 or 12, 7, 8, 9 sometimes, we're like, we don't need HR. Like, HR was a cost center. HR was not a conversation. Yeah. Like, it was very rare that anyone could even associate any impactful strategy around HR. It was like, personnel and madmen. Yeah. Like, that's all HR was.
Yep.
And now, even if people aren't necessarily great fits for PEO, they know the strategic elements of what an HR strategy is. Yeah. And they are talking about learning and development. They are talking about organizational strategy. They are talking about attracting and retaining. Like, these aren't words now that PEO reps are having to jam into their mouths to get them to say back. They know these things. They're looking at these things. And it is because the war for talent has never been higher. Like, even what you said there, it's like, an employee does have to earn their job, right? But not good employees. They never have to earn their job. No. And now it's like a complete flip of no, I've got to get you to stay because everybody out there knows you're good.
And don't you think that the idea, it used to be a cliche that, an employee would leave a business for $2 an hour more somewhere else.
Yep.
It just isn't, that is not true.
Yeah. And there used to be owners who would say, my employee came for a $2 raise. I'd tell them to go to the next place.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. It's just not like that on both sides.
And I think part of it too is, when you imagine the evolution of the industry, and this has been a real challenge for us, it's a challenge for every PEO, the scale that you need to provide these services. Again, the aforementioned example of there being a 50-employee company that's in 7 states. Mm-hmm. The complexity of dealing with that for a business owner, much less for a PEO, it's really, really difficult. But it is our responsibility, any PEO's responsibility, to sort of lend itself to that belief that I'm responsible for making sure that employee feels valued. Mm-hmm. And that is not just, here's your health, here's your 401k, here's your paycheck. Yeah. It is, here's everything associated with the holistic approach we're taking to your overall health, financial, your mental health, and your physical health. But again, everything else, when you get here, this is where I imagine you're going to be. One of the most interesting conversations we have with businesses now, particularly those in the sort of sub 500 employee space, is the extent to which that dream of my future with your company is portrayed in the early stages of your career there. the hardest thing to do because you don't know where that person's going to go.
Sure.
And business owners tend to imagine that, well, I just hired you, so high five me and go to work. Right. And what we're seeing now more and more is when an employee recognizes, like me, like Ryan, that we can be in the same industry for 20 plus years, someone's demonstrating in the same way we might be demonstrating for you, here's what it takes to get there. And not only that, we're going to put you on the pathway by continuing to support you with the necessary tools and resources you need to actually have that dream be fulfilled.
Yeah, we had a cool moment actually with a client of ours, and they had said, and they had an employee come in and ask if they were using a PEO or not during an interview. They were aware of what a PEO was, liked the pathway that they would, build out of it, and asked about it in an interview. And, I'm imagining that's probably happening more and more. Ryan and I talked about the different stages people are in of their awareness to PEOs, if they're kind of unaware or just learning about them, maybe curious. And it's seeming that more of the general public even, and sometimes employees are learning about the power of PEOs, and, asking about them or learning more about them. And so
that's part of what drew me when Ryan and I first met, the way you were talking about the various stages that companies are with relative to their recognition of the industry and what their perception of the industry is. It's so critical. And I really want to mention something else too, because you brought this up before, because you're saying being surrounded by people, meeting people that have been in the industry a long time. I think another really important thing for aspiring salespeople, leaders, and PEO, really a lot of different types of businesses, but specific for this, is surround yourself with really good people. Surround yourself with people that have the recognition. And you said this many times when we had dinner that one time about it's not the right fit for everybody. And for us to go running through the door every time saying you must be on this, it does a disservice to our industry. I think I said to you when we were talking, I want there to be many great PEOs. I love having competitors, many of whom do things a little differently than we do, because it gives us a pathway by which to evangelize the strength of the PEO as a whole, as opposed to just relying on me to demonstrate my own particular incarnation of a PEO as being the only solution. And I think if you surround yourself with really good people, what you find is we all have a lot more in common. And even when I'm sitting at a table, I was at the Big I conference in Illinois back in October, and I bumped into like 4 other PEOs that had booths there. And I just walk up and I'd introduce myself, and a couple of them were like, whoa. And I was like, no, I want to talk to you. What are you guys doing?
They're pulling in their business cards. It's like, they're like,
little siren goes off.
Right. They're like, you can't talk to him. And I think that desire for there to be a lot of good PEOs, and we connected on that, is what shifts the conversation forward to something more meaningful. Because like you're talking about compliance, right? And it was a big part of that conversation. And then as good as the big, the big bigs developed more tech, everything else, they moved up. But that left space for these more tech-based ones or just other smaller ones to grow and excel and touch more people. They also enhance their services. So then what you have in the future is when compliance was almost seemed like witchcraft in itself. It's like, you're going to handle all my compliance. Now you have more educated buyers to go I know what compliance management means, at a PEO level. Even if I've not been with them, the concept is there because it's in this space that has developed so well. So you also free up their mind to have a more strategic conversation. They don't have to sit down and kind of try and internalize, how would you manage my compliance? But no, I get that part. That's simple. I understand benefits admin. I understand even workers' comp mitigation to a degree. But because I got that, I can have a conversation about my attraction and retention strategies, about how I develop better people and move them into better roles and opportunities with the organization. I'm happy to talk to you about that, Bill, because I don't have to figure out all these little things that are now, easy for me to understand.
Yeah, I think part of the goal we had early on in our industry was to educate the workforce, or educate small business America on why they had to be concerned about these things. And now, to your point, it's about being more prepared to properly articulate. You understand what you need. What's the pathway by which to get there? But I want to make, you talked about, some of the larger groups, kind of going up with their technology and everything else. We actually learned a lot from some of the smaller PEOs as well. The extent to which there still is really very much a need for, I don't want to say hand-holding, but a proactive approach. Being deliberately proactive about the way that you address some of those pieces, because the conversation, I always laugh with my team, I'm great at ideas. I'm not always perfect at execution, so I'll come up with something. I'm like, we're all high-fiving each other. This is a great idea.
Yeah.
And then 2 months later, they're like, why didn't we do anything with that thing you said?
You saw Rick just like side-eyed me.
Yeah.
I got a list of ideas.
There's an upside and a downside to great ideas. But, a lot of times businesses, because they're better educated, because small business America is so much better educated about these things than it used to be.
Yeah.
There's that desire to say, yes, I want it. But the problem is that just saying yes is not a manifestation of what you're actually going to do. And so I think what some of the smaller PEOs were doing was holding them accountable to what they had actually said they wanted to do in the beginning. Because the truth is, I have not yet met one client at Paychex PEO who wants to change PEOs. Like, nobody wants to leave. Like, it's not particularly easy to move from one to the other. It's more complex than it used to be, way more complex. And so I think we sort of stepped into that new mindset a couple of years back of saying, yeah, we have to be omnipresent to the extent that we can be to make sure that we're holding them accountable to the things they said they wanted to do, and recognizing the trends, not only in the industry, not only in the global small business environment, but also in their growth. And part of that is understanding the analytics associated with what you've seen with their companies. We never used to do that. Yeah. We'd be like, oh, this 10-person company is now 200. What have we changed? We're still like, you need help with your handbooks? Like, we have to evolve. That I think we're seeing that not just from companies like ours using the data that we have to get better at recognizing those trends, but also paying attention to what other in our industries are doing to teach us a better way forward too.
Yeah. You mentioned learning from some smaller PEOs and then applying that in some ways with Paychex as well. I guess talk a little bit about how that can be applicable to those different size organizations. I mean, you think of sometimes a smaller PEO maybe more localized, and you're going to have, of course, clients of all different sizes. So how can you still learn from those small PEOs, the tactics they take, but then apply those to maybe larger organizations as far as PEO clients go?
One of the key things we learned was, I think we over pivoted. I think many PEOs did. And I'm interested in your opinion on this too. I think a lot of PEOs, larger PEOs, over pivoted to a pure technology solution from a customer service perspective because we may have misunderstood the new generation of business owners because they shop differently, right? They're not as eager to have that salesperson come running through their door on the first day. They want to get a lot of information first, to your point, be better educated, to be at point 3 of a 10-point process as opposed to previously where 1. So I think that, from the perspective of what we saw, we kind of worked really hard on our technology and we feel very comfortable that we have great technology, but we pivoted away from that one point of contact. Yeah. And so getting back to that through our client advocacy program, our relationship manager program, which we introduced about 2 years ago. And again, we're not unique in this. Some others have done the same. We've gotten back to that piece where it's like, I can pick up the phone and call Kelly.
Yeah.
I can call Brian and I can say, I have a problem with this. I don't know where to go. And do not tell me to call an 800 number to get it fixed. And that was something that we really learned from some really well-known and long-standing smaller PEOs. Now, the flip side, and I think where they would agree, their challenge is scale. Right? Their challenge is really good locally. How do I scale up to a 50,000 worksite employee PEO that's going to have presence in 26 states? It's very difficult to do without scale. So I think they're learning from us how to create efficiencies in that arena. Yeah. But again, we're learning from them as well.
Yeah, I would agree. There, obviously, I've always believed with the more technology we have, the more people will long for high touch. Yeah. And so there's this flex when we bring all this tech in, and it is great and it's dynamic, and I can view it on my phone just as quickly as I can on the desktop. Like that solves a lot of issues, and it does in the environment of transactional. Like, because that's where it fixes things. It streamlines, it connects things, and it makes it easier. You're creating more space by being better to go address more strategic HR issues, which I organize more in the HR transformational aspect. Mm-hmm. And to find that that's not there, or to find that in order to do something like develop new return to work policies, or RTO, which is wildly important to people. Yep. Like, I kind of now have to work in this service team model where you have 200 different clients and I don't really have access to you, and I have to submit what feels like almost like a HR IT ticket to get a process going. That's where they see like a degradation of that value. And so we know to scale, PEOs have had to get more efficient. They come up with business team models or small team models for like the 10 to 25. But I think it's always going to be important for those PEOs to recognize like there will be these really important moments where they need you and they need to need a person, not a technology. And how do we support that? Like, how do we give that person what they need? Because that becomes the nagging negative event that eventually pushes them out. Everything else has been going great. Everything else, the tech has always worked and it's integrated and everything else. But then I had this really important thing and I couldn't get somebody on the phone, or I got directed to an 800 number, or I went through a call tree, or it just didn't seem like somebody cared. And even though everything else has been great, the relationship starts to erode. And then you have a renewal that's 8% instead of 3%. And then like, some PEO rep knocks on the door and it's like all that's lost. And all they just wanted was connection with somebody who was going to take care of them. Like what at the forefront of PEO has always been about. It's like taking care of people.
Yeah, and I think that extends to the type of relationships that we have, right? That developing these relationships is getting a better understanding of what your particular clients need. I was having a conversation last week about this with another partner of ours, and the narrative I was getting around what they needed and what kind of help they needed was totally different than any conversation I'd had in a long time. And part of that is having that connection at every stage, not only of the sales process, but also the customer service process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we've spent a lot of time, justifiably so, talking about the sales process and leadership and everything else. But at the end of the day, they're buying a service. And the service is these people, and that's what they want. And like that is what they're eventually going to grade this relationship out on, is did it make a big difference in my business?
Yeah, and it does go back to you mentioned it. Is it at a time when I needed you most? Like you said, everything else can be perfect, but in that time when that stress hit, that sort of that seminal moment that required real help to help me with a strategy or help me with a particular employee issue or whatever else, were you there within the capacity of where I needed you to be at that time? And yeah, it's critical, and it is difficult because everyone's priorities are different. Everyone's urgencies are different. And so you do have to be able to sort of be a bit of a chameleon in that regard as a service organization.
And to our conversation earlier, that's when someone needs a leader. Like when that's when I need you the most. Like that's what I remember is, were you there when I needed you? And we know that concept exists in leadership, and we know that's what the best leaders do. And that's what exists in PEO. Like, you were there for me or you weren't.
Yeah.
And that's now how I think about you.
Yeah. The amount of damage, and again, this is not limited to the PEO space, but the amount of damage that can be done by a poor leader. Because again, I think back about what the PEO, and this will resonate with you as well, what the PEO has gone through in the last 20 years. Just, we talked a lot about recognition and the legislative changes, but some of the things that it's gone through in the past 20 years, and this is sometimes state specific, is ebbs and flows within the health insurance market. I mean, when I started selling PEO, it was like, here's your rate. I'm going to save you $60,000. Like if we ever tell you we were really great salespeople like 15 years ago, like, can I save you $60,000?
Now I worked in Disparity. That never happened there. Yeah, that's right.
That's what we were going up against.
Sounds great.
But we look back and, you had periods of ebbs and flows in the health insurance space. Workers' compensation insurance in most states has been going down for like the last 8-10 years, but there was a period when it was going up. Certainly we expected a huge spike in state unemployment insurance post-COVID, and that didn't happen as much as we thought it was going to happen. But, being able to pay attention to all those pieces is what makes it a complex industry. But then the extent to which the people that are out there talking have to be able to demonstrate their knowledge of how that's impacting the business and how we're addressing it. But then to your point, when difficulty happens in the industry or the economy, that's where leadership really matters too.
Yeah. And I've always felt, and I'd be curious what you think about that, just because you said the economy, and we're obviously facing some things here, and why that service matters, along with the technology, is because it can meet people where they are. And a PEO, in a lot of ways, could be looked at as a recession-proof type solution, because when times are good and capital is accessible, you recruit people, you grow, you enhance benefits in order to do that. You do all these sorts of things. On the flip side of that, when things are kind of going sideways a little bit, in a recession, employee litigation goes up.
Yep.
And risk goes up for business owners, and the need to lay people off effectively, to have reductions in workforce, to manage, through this time. And so it's kind of like that those things aren't solved by technology exclusively. That is strategy, and that is people in rooms talking with that business owner, particularly on this recession side, like about hard conversations he or she are going to have. And again, you turn and look at your, team, and you're like, you're not there for me. And so it's great that it can do that, but it also puts a big spotlight on why the service matters so great.
Yeah, I love that you bring this up, because I remember the recessionary environment that was happening in the 2008, 2009 timeframe,
Mm-hmm.
and the extent to which our industry pivoted rather considerably at that time. And it was a lot about strategies. I mean, we had very difficult conversations with clients, some of whom we were saying, I simply can't offer medical insurance anymore. And what are we going to do? And then we would try and pivot to more of okay, what other types of benefits can we put in place? We're going to have to take this away. Can we enhance some of these smaller ancillary benefits in the offering that you have there? In some cases, there were strategies that we could bring up that would help the business owner keep those employees through those difficult times while still decreasing their expenses. Sometimes it was backing down from a particularly rich medical plan to go down to one that was substantially less risk, but still coverage. Changing contribution rates, creating new classification codes where your key employees would be receiving the same, but you might have to go down a little lower for the new employees. Those are a lot of strategies we had to take. And it helped us retain a lot of our clients and bring on a lot of new clients during an environment where most businesses were really struggling. I think that's what's really, I love that you said that, recession proof. I mean, I use that phrase a lot. It is a business model that, if used correctly, will help you both in good economic times and difficult economic times.
Yeah.
It's proven out many times.
And that becomes the opportunity because I think people, the best way out of our economy is, or a recession, is through it. And it's again, kind of at that time, that business owner is battling so many, wars on different fronts. And I'm trying to keep my employees paid. I'm trying to navigate this. I'm trying to keep as many as I can. I need to service my clients and find new clients in this new headwind. And so the fact that you can show up for them, and a PEO does have that capability. And, while we've been saying technology, what have you, but the reality is a PEO does have that capability to show up for you in those really hard times. You will also look back and go, that was really impactful. The fact they could help us grow from 10 to 200, well, our business was obviously thriving, and that was great. They helped us more efficiently and controlled our costs. But when things were rough, the fact that they helped us get through that saved our business. That saved it could have saved that business owner's mental health, having someone to lean on. And so that's where PEOs can truly shine. It's easy to do good work in the best of times.
I was going to say that the team kind of seems to be listening. I mean, from a leadership perspective, that's how you inform the leadership style you're going to have, is to listen to the folks that you're over. But then also the PEOs need to be listening to what not only the market is saying that these small businesses need, but then also what they're telling them they need. And I guess my question for you is, I've often heard that if you have a friend and they need help, just offering, how can I help you, isn't necessarily a great thing to do, right? Just saying I'm available. But actually reaching out, actually being proactive is what you should do. And so I guess I'm wondering, to what degree can the PEOs be proactive with that outreach, knowing that these companies and small businesses need help?
Are you talking more about reaching out to them to talk about PEO first time, or to clients?
To clients. So maybe they have some headwinds coming up or regulatory changes.
Yeah, I think it starts with the communication that you have to have ongoing. That's a struggle in our industry, because business owners don't have time to sit down, and they don't want to have strategy meet. We're talking about this, they need you when they need you.
Mm-hmm. They need the work.
You just brought up a great point, Rick. It's this idea of, if I knew what I needed, I would have already asked you.
Of course, yeah.
Right. And so foundationally, understanding in the beginning stages of your relationship what the vision of that business is for that business owner and for the key employees that are in that business. And sometimes that's understanding the historical perspective too. I mean, it's a profoundly different approach to a company that was inherited from a parent, for example. There's someone who started it themselves 5 years ago.
Mm.
Are they entrepreneurial, or are they really more just trying to keep it going at the 10% clip every year so they hand to their kids? It's really important to understand that. But those touch points that sometimes come with recognizing in the data that there is a change that's occurred, I think that's where we need to get better as an industry, is to not just wait for the human to pick up the phone and call us, because there's usually a fire drill at that point. And the success you will have in that situation is dependent upon how far on the fire drill we are. But I think the more we can look at data and be able to see trends that the businesses have demonstrated through everything we gather, which is a significant amount of information. I mean, the amount of information that companies like mine have is enormous. Yeah. If we can get better at reading that and understanding, okay, I've seen that they've gone from 50 to 100. I have to have, or they just hired 10 people in the last 2 weeks. I need to pick up the phone and call them and say, what's going on? Yeah. How do I help? Here, by the way, you hired someone in Kansas. Are you going, I don't know why I chose Kansas, but you're going, you're going, it looks like you're going to be a little bit more of a national company. Here's some things you need to think about as a consequence of that. And once you come to the table with some ideas, that's usually when the conversation will go somewhere where a need is uncovered. Saying, what do you need from me, is almost always going to be responded with, I have no idea. Yeah. If I knew, you'd know.
Yeah, Ryan, you often talk about it like the navigator in a car. I think we talked about it on the last podcast episode, which is about onboardings and how critical they are. And it's, letting them know, hey, you have a turn coming up in 1 mile. Look out for this pothole over here, which I want a navigator that tells me to dodge potholes. But maybe technology is getting, it's like PEO technology is growing. So, but I think that's such a great analogy for it too, because it's not only through the onboarding process, but it's ongoing, and it really does need to have that foresight. The PEOs need to have that foresight to let those small businesses know, like, hey, you're going to get there. We're going to get there together. I'm going to walk you through any obstacles along the way.
Yeah. I mean, it is the opportunity for the PEO to deliver the best value, which is we are going to help you not only through a situation, but we're just going to help you grow your business. And I think what I think about when I hear you talking about all the data and all the things you guys look at, it's like that's an immense competitive advantage large PEOs have. But also, like, how do I balance that with like that small PEO approach, which is like, I'm going to call and I'm going to hold you accountable. Like, Rick, you said we were going to do this. Like, and here's what I know. Like, here's what I can forecast. If we don't meet in the next couple of weeks, like, or month or so, like something's going to come up and you're going to call me with a fire truck. Just why don't we this is just what happens. Second you skip no show, our service team meeting, something bad's going to happen. So let's just have it. And let's like try to look on the horizon about what we could be doing, and maybe let me take care of you the way you want me to, with respect to the fact I know you've got a lot of stuff going on. So I think it's how you can leverage that data, but leverage that kind of intensity that some of those smaller PEOs can have to like force the conversation is probably a great balance point.
I couldn't agree more. There is such a balance there, because again, I always say when you're dealing with a 5,000 employee company, the conversations that you're having are generally the people that are only focused on that thing, right? That I am the HR director, or I am in charge of benefits enrollment. And so I'm talking to that person about that thing. You're talking to the business owner who has 100 employees, they're everything, right? And the person that they may put you in contact is equally everything. They may have a title, but it generally means I do whatever's required when it's required. And so I think that's a huge understanding that we have to have going into those conversations. The second thing I would say is, with the data, though, I think you're right. There is a competitive advantage for companies that are larger, to the extent that they understand how to use it. They understand how to not make it something that feels uncomfortable. I mean, I'm glad this podcast isn't about AI, because I exhausted my knowledge of it by saying AI. But the real notion of how we could also be delivering better value to employees by virtue of the data. Yeah. Like, how could we be getting the necessary resources in front of them? Yeah. On the basis of what we know about their life cycle with us is also a crucial part of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, Bill, I do want to ask you a question, which is, let's rewind back to you. You got an opportunity to work at a jazz club young, but at like 25. Let's say somebody is just about to start their career in the PEO space. A lot of our listeners are maybe researching companies to work for in this space. That's how they come across us. I guess, what would you say to somebody who's just starting, kind of like a young version of you in the PEO space, of like what to expect, and should they get into it?
Well, obviously, I think they should get into it. Yeah. But I'm a little biased. But I do think that it's basically on some of the fronts that Ryan and I have been discussing this in terms of how the industry has changed so much, how it is a different industry in a recessionary environment versus market environment. I mean, all those things lend itself to a really creative career, a career that if you embrace it, you can really you can differentiate yourself from everyone else, not just by virtue of who you work for, but how you go to market. It allows you to be very creative. There's a lot of things you can sell these days that, frankly, just go sell this thing. This is like, find what you love and find that part of it that brings you joy and enthusiasm and passion, and then go do that. I think when you're seeking that role early on, and this goes back to everything we've been talking about, I think I'd be less concerned about what the name on the banner says.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about the people that I meet and the vision that they have for what they're trying to do. Obviously, I'm a huge advocate of getting people to apply where I go.
Yeah.
But I think that, if you're looking to get started and maybe you don't have the requisite experience to work for some, but others have interest in that development and they really want to give you an opportunity, just ask yourself a very simple question. Do I trust this person to do what they say? And do I feel as though the connection that we have is real, or am I just being sold the hope that I'm going to go out, knock on 700 doors and sell 5 pieces of business in the first 6 months? I think in any career, particularly when you're starting, it goes back to that 90-day theory about when you get hired somewhere. Starting in a career is entirely about who you're surrounded by and the level of support you feel you're going to get. And that's not limited to companies like mine. I mean, again, I'm biased, but there's a lot of really great companies out there that are telling great stories in our industry. You just got to find somewhere where your passion is going to be fed, and you're going to be surrounded by people that genuinely have an interest. I say this all the time. I want people to ask me questions about what my success means to me personally. I want my leaders to say to me, hey, if this happens, if these goals that you have for yourself are achieved, what is it going to mean for your wife and 3 kids?
Yeah.
What's it going to mean for you? Because what we are remembered for as leaders has nothing to do with whether we hit quota in fiscal 26. It has everything to do with what hitting quota or exceeding it actually meant for us. And that's where the passion comes from. Because every time you get to that mountaintop, you're seeking the next one, but only if getting there was something you could share with people, for whom it really resonated. And it gave you something to think about for, why I do this is more about, the passion that I have for the outcome, not just the reward that I get because I make more money. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, that's terrific. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming on. I think this is an amazing episode. And that's really, again, we've got tons of experience in the industry here. So I'll be watching the analytics on this one and see how well it does. So thank you again for coming out to St. Louis and doing this episode here, our first in-person guest. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll definitely be chopping this one up a bit and putting it on LinkedIn. And so jump on over, listen to the full thing here. And there's a few nuggets we could use. There's a few. There's a couple. Yeah, I know you're gonna have to dig.
Is it cutting me out?
You're gonna have to dig. You're gonna have to dig. You and Ryan, you're gonna have to dig. Oh, fusion. Yeah.
Hey guys, this was a great pleasure for me. I really feel honored to have been invited, and appreciate your partnership. And this. I love this. I'm sharing this with a lot of people too. So it's good stuff.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah. Thanks, Phil.